The Golden Lotus was not merely a restaurant. It was a theater of silence where the city's most dangerous predators came to feed, and tonight, the air was thick enough to choke on. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light over velvet banquettes and mahogany tables that cost more than Elena's entire life. She stood by the service station, her hands trembling imperceptibly against the starch of her long black skirt, the red vest feeling like a target painted on her chest. She was 22, invisible, and trying to remain a ghost in a room full of people who made ghosts for a living. The maitre d', a man whose smile was as sharp and cold as a scalpel, snapped his fingers near her ear, the sound cracking like a whip. "Table 1, he whispered, the words hissing through his teeth. "The chairman is here. Do not make a sound unless spoken to. Do not look them in the eye.
Pour. Bow.
Vanish." Elena nodded, her throat too dry to manage a verbal response. She knew who sat at table 1. Everyone in the underworld knew the Park family, the royalty of the syndicate, the sharks that swam in the deepest, bloodiest waters. She picked up the heavy porcelain teapot, the ceramic biting into her palm. As she moved across the plush carpet, the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to die away, sucked into the gravitational pull of the 3 men sitting in the center of the room. 2 bodyguards stood like marble statues in the periphery, but Elena's eyes, against her will, flickered to the man sitting to the right of the elderly chairman. He was the son,
The heir. Jonah.
He was 31 years of old, possessing a beauty that was almost offensive in its cruelty. His suit was tailored to a lethal perfection, outlining broad shoulders that held the tension of a coiled spring. He didn't sit, he presided. His eyes were dark voids, scanning the room not with interest, but with the boredom of a lion deciding which gazelle would die least painfully. As Elena approached, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of something sharper, gun oil or perhaps just the aura of violence, assaulted her senses. She felt the heavy weight of her own history pressing against her spine, a secret she had buried under years of silence and feigned ignorance. Here, in the lion's den, she was just a waitress, just a body in a uniform. But as she neared the table, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, reaching for her ankles. The memory hit her like a physical blow, a sudden fracture in the linear progression of the night. 7 years ago, the smell of rain on hot asphalt and the distinct, briny scent of the harbor in a city thousands of miles away. She was younger then, a child of circumstance, swept up into a household that was not her own, learning to survive in a language that did not match her skin. The orphanage had been cold, but the house she had served in was colder. She remembered the old woman who had taught her to speak, the cook who had hidden her from the angry men who came to collect debts. "Speak the old tongue, child," the cook had whispered, pressing a warm dumpling into her hand. "It is the language of the hearth. It commands respect from the elders. It is the code of the inner circle." Elena had learned the dialect of the southern provinces, a rough, guttural, yet affectionate way of speaking that was dying out, preserved only by the families who held onto the old traditions with iron grips. It was a dialect of fishermen and warlords, of people who understood honor as a currency more valuable than gold. She remembered the sound of waves crashing against the rocks, the feeling of hiding in the pantry while heavy boots stomped through the hallway. She remembered the fear of being discovered, the knowledge that her existence was a complication. Run, Elena. Run until the ocean stops you. And she had run. She had crossed oceans, changed her name, buried her voice, and hidden in the noise of the West. She had become nobody. She had become a waitress in a red vest, serving tea to men who would burn the world down for a perceived slight. But the past was not a place you left behind. It was a shadow sewn to your heels. Elena's hand shook as she reached the table. The steam from the teapot curled into the air, a white ribbon dancing between her and the monsters. She poured for Junho first. He did not move, did not acknowledge her presence, but she felt his awareness like a laser burned onto her skin. He was watching her reflection in the polished silver of his cutlery. She filled the cup with precision, stopping exactly at the rim, terrified that a single drop spilled would be her death sentence. Then she moved to the chairman. The old man looked frail, his skin like parchment paper stretched over brittle bone, but his eyes were alive with a terrifying intelligence. He was coughing, a wet, rattling sound that made the bodyguards tense. Junho leaned forward, his expression tightening, a flicker of genuine concern breaking through his mask of indifference. "Father," Junho said, his voice a low baritone that commanded the air around them. "We should leave. The air here is too dry for you. Sit," the chairman wheezed, waving a hand dismissively. "I am not a corpse yet. Let me eat in peace." Elena finished pouring the tea for the chairman. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She needed to leave. She needed to vanish, as the maitre d' had said. But the chairman's cough worsened, a violent spasm that shook his thin frame. Instinct overrode survival. It was a muscle memory from that other life, from the nights spent tending to the old cook who had saved her. Without thinking, without processing the insanity of her actions, Elena placed the teapot down and reached for the glass of water, offering it to him with two hands, her head bowed low. And then she spoke. It wasn't English. It wasn't the standard formal language taught in universities. It was the dialect, the specific, rustic, rare dialect of the chairman's home village, a way of speaking that implied intimacy, deference, and a shared history of the blood-soaked soil of his birthplace. "Honored elder, please drink slowly, or the wind in your chest will become a storm," she said softly, the vowels flattening, the cadence rhythmic and lilting, a sound that belonged in a fishing village 40 years ago, not a luxury restaurant in the city. The silence that followed was absolute. It was violent. It was the sound of an executioner's blade pausing at the top of its arc. The clinking of silverware at nearby tables seemed to stop. The air conditioning hum vanished. Every guest within earshot, those who understood the language and those who merely felt the shift in atmospheric pressure, froze. The chairman's glass halted halfway to his lips. His hand, shaking moments before, went still. He slowly turned his head, looking up at the African-American waitress standing in her cheap uniform, his eyes wide with a shock that bordered on reverence. It was as if a ghost had just walked through the wall and spoken to him in the voice of his dead mother. But it was Junho's reaction that sucked the oxygen from the room. The young boss stood up. The movement was fluid and terrifyingly fast. His chair scraped against the floor, a harsh shriek that made 3 people at the next table jump. He didn't look at his father. He looked at Elena. His expression of boredom was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces, replaced by a look of intense, predatory focus.